Let's now go to a 2026 schedule preview. So this is just going to be a first look. Obviously, well, we've mostly got a good idea of, you know, we've got a good idea of what the rosters are going to look like for a lot of these teams, but player development and we'll get a better idea what these teams look like, especially as we get closer to football season, as we get through spring practice and all this, where some teams will figure out their quarterback situation and all that. Um, so first up on the schedule, you get Southeast Missouri. I would say whomped them a couple years ago. This should be your classic warm up game. We'll see. It's funny because Matt Campbell actually lost his first game at Iowa State, which was to UNI. Actually lost that one, and then went and got hammered on the road at Iowa City in Iowa City the next week. And the team right now is in a much better spot than it was when Matt Campbell took over. So I would expect Iowa State to roll over Southeast Missouri, who is not, they're an FCS team and they're not a good one at that. So I think you roll over Southeast Missouri. Next one is on the road at Kinnick. Now, this is a tough one. Obviously, you're playing at Kinnick's always tough. I don't think it's like a runaway. Iowa's gonna walk away with this thing. Because Iowa is losing quite a bit. Even going into next season. See, they don't actually have their roster listed up on their website yet. I was hoping to find that. Because I was trying to say I was hoping to see if I could find what they're doing for the quarterback spot. Because obviously they lose Gronowski they lose Gronowski to graduation. I don't know if they're planning on just keeping people on staff. They got a couple decent players in the portal. Defensive tackle. They got a defensive tackle from North Dakota, a receiver from Furman. Got another safety, Xavier Styles from Robert Morris. Got a running back, LJ Phillips Jr. from. He was in the FCS last year. I'm trying to remember where he came from. Then you got another wide receiver, Tony Diaz, who's coming in from UT Rio Grande Valley. They got a safety, Tyler Brown from James Madison, defensive end from Mississippi State, a couple of different offensive linemen. I am not seeing though. It's hard to pay attention to Iowa's transfer portal because obviously we were so focused on Iowa State's. But from what I can tell, I don't believe they picked up a quarterback in the transfer portal, which is real interesting. Not really sure what their plan is there. Hank Brown, I guess, that's the general prevailing thought. I would be shocked if Hank Brown is as good as Gronowski was last year, which Gronowski did not start well, but he ended up being a solid enough quarterback. I don't believe Hank Brown is that dude like that. So, they lost a couple pieces to the transfer portal as well. Lost a couple defensive players, lost safety Conan Entringer, DJ Bell, Brian Allen. They lost their running back, Jazz Patterson, and their punter, Reese Dakin, and then another defensive back, Cale Kolerick, which I don't think he had played a whole lot. A couple other smaller pieces, Jackson Stratton, Terrell Washington, a running back. So, they lost a few pieces, and they lost a few pieces to graduation. But, is Hank Brown going to be ready to take on this defense that's going to be I was going to have limited film on. They're going to have limited film on this defense. They'll have it against SEMO, but they'll probably run some pretty basic sets. So they'll have limited tape on this team. Obviously, Iowa State will also be just trying to kind of get their footing underneath them. Jalen Rayner is a much more mobile quarterback than Iowa State has had for a while. he's probably, I would say Jalen Raynor is probably the most mobile quarterback Iowa State has had since Brett Meyer, I would say at least. You could maybe argue that he's more athletic than Brett Meyer. Maybe you say, maybe you could say Jalen Raynor is the most athletic or the most, the most mobile quarterback Iowa State's had since Seneca Wallace. So that will present an interesting challenge for Iowa to defend because they do not see a lot of mobile quarterbacks in the Big Ten. They just don't. Um, so that'll be interesting. So I think you got with a new roster, a new scheme, a new coach, a mobile quarterback. Uh, that and then I was trying to break in a quarterback. That to me feels like the possibility for an upset there. I mean, and I think it would probably be an upset. Not a big one, but an upset. But I think Iowa State has a chance to go in there and get that one as long as, Coach Rogers and, um, and the team doesn't, go in there and all of a sudden, get scared of the environment or something like that. I see that as a potential upset there. I do not think it's a foregone conclusion that Iowa wins in Kinnick in that game. Bowling Green up next. Of course, we have the infamous road game at the G5 school next year where we have to play at Bowling Green, which is just absurd. What's up, Finney? Obviously, we grabbed Cameron Petaway from them in the portal. You should win this game. It's a G5 game at home. You should win this thing by a few touchdowns. That's just kind of you need, like, if you lose in Iowa, this is your chance to get back, back rolling before Big 12 play starts. So then the next week after that, you've got Utah at home. This will be for Utah's first trip to Ames since I want to say 2010 or 2011 when they just blew us out at home. Nightmare football game to be at. Utah, I think should be pretty good. They have a new coach now. They lost some stuff to the transfer portal to Michigan, brought some stuff in. Devin Dampier, I believe, is back. So they'll be probably a pretty solid unit. That that coaching change situation is kind of he was already the coach in waiting. So they had that set up specifically to not see this massive turnover in how things are done at Utah. I would expect them to probably, I guess it'll depend on how they play up to this point in the season, but I would guess Utah would probably be a slight favorite in that game at home, depending on how Iowa State's doing. Obviously, if Iowa State's squeaking by the first, they're squeaking by SEMO and Bowling Green, and then they lose in Kinnick, maybe Utah's a touchdown favorite or something like that. But in the end, Iowa State's always got freshman year Utah. I believe that was my freshman year too. So we might have been at Iowa State at the same time. But so Utah, I think in the end, Iowa State can always win at Jack Trice. It's just with the environment and just how well Iowa State typically plays at home. That Iowa State's gonna have a shot at that one. Now that, again, having a mobile quarterback changes a lot of things. And if they can get, Jalen Raynor going, get that offensive line moving the ball and limit Jalen Raynor's turnovers, they're going to have a shot in pretty much all of these games. And you can absolutely pick off Utah at home. Next up, you've got West Virginia. First time, did not play them last year. Now, they were pretty decent last year. You beat them a couple years ago in Morgantown. But obviously completely different team for both of them, different coaching staffs, different teams. And, West Virginia was really solid last year. And I think a lot of people expect them to take another step forward with Rich Rod this season. They spent in the portal, got some really, really big transfers. I'm going to pull them up. Especially at quarterback and all that. They got some really, really nice players. Let's see here. I'm trying to sort these here. So, specifically, I was trying to find the quarterback that they signed, whose name I'm just completely forgetting. But then they grabbed some really nice players. Forgot that that whole offense has basically been overhauled. And I'm trying to find the damn thing. I hate On3's site. I don't like them at all. Okay, so they pulled a receiver from USC and Prince Strahan. They got Isaiah Patterson, linebacker from UNLV. They got the quarterback Michael Hawkins from Oklahoma, uh, who had played sparingly over the last few seasons. He kind of like kept getting recruited over, but in the times he's gotten to play, he's been solid. Uh, but Michael Hawkins transferring from Oklahoma, which is a big, that's a talented player for them. That's probably the most talented guy they've had there. DJ Epps from Troy, who had 5 touchdowns and 512 yards last year, was a good kick returner. Got linebacker Tyler Stolsky from Fuller Atlantic that had 90 tackles. Um, you know, they got a lot. They spent a lot of money in the portal, and I think they're going to be. I think they're going to be pretty solid. I'm not sure exactly what to expect them just because they've been really disappointing for the last 5 years. I would say. I mean, the downfall of West Virginia really started with that 2018 game in Jack Trice Stadium where they got blown out because then the whole Dana Holgerson thing flamed out, and then Neil Brown never got it going, and now here we are. But this will be a tough game. We'll know more about this game once we get closer, because we have to see kind of how good West Virginia is going to be. But at this point in the season, I would say we'll have had 4 games under its belt. They'll have had plenty of opportunities to kind of get this thing rolling a little bit. You would think by now the defense should be humming okay. So, another definitely winnable game. Next up is what's probably going to end up being the most difficult game on the schedule, which is at BYU on October 10th. That's going to be a tough game. BYU game, obviously probably should have beaten BYU last year, but Bear Bachmeier was better than a lot of people thought he was going to be. Because everyone thought it was going to be Jake Retzlaff, and then that whole deal, it ended up with him at Tulane. But Bear Bachmeier was really solid. The defense was really good. They were, a playoff contender for a long time. You made to the Big 12 title game and just lost to Texas Tech because Texas Tech was really good. This will be a really tough game. If you're chalking up wins and losses, I'm going to say this will be a tough one to come out with a win. Right now, I would probably predict that as a loss just because it's a tough road environment. BYU is going to be a really solid team. Next up, you got you actually do have your first and only bye week of the season, which is right after that BYU game, and then you're at Arizona. You're on the road down in Tucson. Obviously, I would say blasted Arizona last year. Arizona was much better this past season than they were the previous season. I would expect them to be a really solid team again. I think last year their defense was super mega aggressive, and they had to be to kind of compete and to try to get teams behind the chains and all that because they just didn't have the personnel for it. This year, I would expect them to take a step up and be a little bit less. What's the word for it? They're a little less gimmicky, I guess maybe is the word I would use. You're going down to Tucson, which I wouldn't put Tucson up there with like all the intimidating road games in college football, but you're on the road and should be nice weather though. October 24th down in southern Arizona should be nice weather. This will be a solid game. This could be an opportunity for Iowa State to pick up a road win. Just depending on where these teams are at. That should be a competitive game, I think. Yeah, BYU is going to be a slugfest. That's going to be a nasty, ugly game. After your road trip down to Tucson, you've got Oklahoma State at home. Now, Oklahoma State was horrific last year. Iowa State finished out, beat them on the road, all that. That's great. Their offense was horrible. Their defense ended up kind of being okay by the end of the season. Now they've got a brand new coach. They've got a new quarterback in Drew Mestemaker from, they brought a bunch of North Texas's offense, which, North Texas was really, really good last year. And Mestemaker was, arguably like the best freshman quarterback in the country last season. So I would assume, I would be shocked if Oklahoma State isn't improved and at least, in bowl contention this year. I don't know if their roster's 100% in shape to be like a real contender necessarily, but they're going to be good enough they're going to be good enough on offense to give some people problems. Luckily, you get them at home. Um, I this I again, you're protecting at home. These games are always close, but I this to me feels like a game where Iowa State can pick up another win. Um, yeah, Arizona will be interesting. Their defense should be better, but yeah, the offense could take a step back. They lost some pieces. They do still have um no Fafita at quarterback, but they keep losing pieces on offense, and they're not able to replace, because they didn't have Tedroy and McMillan last year, and that clearly hurt them. So we'll see if they can get it together. The defense should be a little bit better, a little bit less gimmicky, but I don't know what they're going to have going on offense necessarily. And Oklahoma State, like you said, as well. Oklahoma State's going to be a lot better, but the bar is just it's in the ground for being better because they were just so bad last year. After your home game against Oklahoma State, you are on the road at Baylor. I believe at this point, Dave Aranda will be coaching for his job if he still has a job at this point. I don't think Baylor is going to be anything great. They were very mediocre last year. I don't know that they got anything in the portal that's going to move the needle a whole lot. I think at this point, just for the third season in a row, basically, Dave Aranda is kind of half coaching for his job by the time you get to November, and Baylor is in a weird spot. So, maybe this is a desperation game for Baylor. Maybe it's they've already kind of given up on this. Maybe Dave Aranda is fired, and then Iowa State catches the dead cat bounce. Either way, I don't like playing in Waco. Iowa State does not particularly play well in Waco. So I don't feel great about that game just because of the road venue and because there could be some circumstances around Baylor that could lead to an extra bit of desperation there that we didn't see, that we haven't seen in the last few years. After your trip to Waco, you're back home against Cincinnati. This is obviously now, I would say this is a revenge game, but there's only a few players left on the roster from last year. Obviously, Cincinnati lost Brennan Sorsby in the portal, which is a massive, massive hit for them. I think that running back, I want to say he's gone to graduation. I have to check on that. But Cincinnati obviously lost a ton. Their defensive coordinator, Tyson Veit, left to go to Penn State to be the linebackers coach. This is probably, I would guess, this is probably this might be Scott Satterfield's last hurrah. They had a decent season last year, but I think most people can see that was a product of having Brennan Sorsby and a couple really good defenders. But they lost Dante Corleone as well, so they lost a few big pieces on defense. They lost their quarterback. I would expect. I think Cincinnati will be a very much kind of an also ran middle of the pack type team. I don't think they're going to be bad, but you should absolutely be able to pick off Cincinnati at home. Final road trip of the season then is down to Central Florida, down in Orlando. That'll be Iowa State's first trip to the self-proclaimed bounce house, which I believe is maybe one of the most overrated home venues in college football. It is not intimidating. It is not a large stadium. They have some rowdy fans like once a year for their space game, but it is not what I would refer to as an intimidating environment. Central Florida continues to be the most made up good football school in college football. And it is also coached by Scott Frost, who was good there the first time, was terrible at Nebraska. And, and they weren't very good last year because the roster was in shambles. I don't know. I think they've got some pieces in the portal, but I'm dubious that UCF will ever really have a shot to be a top end of the conference contender. I feel like Central Florida is kind of doomed to be a 6-6 to a 5-7 to 7-5 team pretty much every year. Maybe once in a while they reach up and they snag an 8-4 type of thing, but I just don't see how Central Florida remains competitive at the top of the conference. They can be a middle of the road team for sure, but I'm just not a believer in that whole operation down there. I find their fan base, I find the entire school to be incredibly annoying. They talk like they're Nebraska. They act the same as Nebraska, but Nebraska at the minimum has some national titles to back it up in a long string of success like in the 80s and 90s. Um, UCF had 1 year, almost a decade ago, where they were really good, and they've been just fine since then. But they talk like they're one of the premier programs in college football, and I I would love Iowa State to go down there and beat them by 3 touchdowns. Which at this point we're gonna know everything. We're gonna know pretty much everything there is to know about both of these teams at this point in the season. So yeah, go down there and beat UCF. Then you wrap up at home with Farmageddon against Kansas State. This will be the 110th consecutive meeting for Iowa State and Kansas State, and it will be the last consecutive meeting as of right now, unless the Big 12 gets their shit together and redoes the schedule and lets Farmageddon be a protected rival. From what I understand, my understanding of the situation is that Gene Taylor at Kansas State is the one that is not pushing for this to be like kind of an official rivalry or anything like that, because he and Jamie Pollard don't have the best relationship. Um, you know, it'll be a sad day to see this rivalry be discontinued in 2027. But you get Kansas State at home, and they bring back Avery Johnson, but they lose a number of other pieces in the portal. They've got a new coach in Colin Klein. We will see. I mean, I'm not an Avery Johnson believer. John Haycock's defense tore him apart. Will this new defensive scheme continue to give him lots of problems? We'll find out. I am not confident about anything about Kansas State. They could be 8-4. They could be 5-7. I'm not really sure what to make of Kansas State. Keeping Avery Johnson was good, I guess, because he's like theoretically a good player, even though he has not even come close to, hitting his ceiling or, as a football player, maybe he hasn't come close to being the player that a lot of people thought he could be. Now, does that mean he hasn't hit his potential, or does that mean that his potential was just a lot lower? Who knows? But we do know that Avery Johnson at this point in his career is not the player that everyone thought he was going to be able to be. So, is that enough? Will a coaching change? Will a coaching change and a new staff be enough to kind of unlock his potential? Maybe, but we kind of got to see it until we kind of got to see it to believe it with Avery Johnson being an elite quarterback. So, I don't know. It's there's some tough games in here, but this is a navigable schedule. It's worth noting that Iowa State does not leave the state of Iowa until that BYU game on October 10th. They don't, they're just in the state of Iowa for the first 5 games, because your only road game is the Iowa game. So if we're just kind of projecting here, let's do a floor and a ceiling. So a floor, you're going to beat Southeast Missouri. Let's say you lose to Iowa, you beat Bowling Green, so you're 2-1 there. Utah's pretty good. Let's say they, you fall to 2-2 there. West Virginia, I just don't know. Maybe they're not gelled yet. West Virginia's got a year under their belt. They're a year ahead in the kind of the gelling process. Let's say you lose to West Virginia, 2-3. Absolutely can lose that. 2-4. It's a road game. 2-5. I think Oklahoma State you're gonna beat. 3-5. Baylor's a tough one. Maybe you get the dead cat bounce there. Call it 3-6. Cincinnati feels like one where I'm not saying they can't lose it, but I really don't see them losing that one. I think there's some motivation there, and I think some motivation there. But by this point, Iowa State's cooking, hopefully, and Scott Satterfield's probably actually coaching for his job at this point. So give me 4-6 there at UCF. I don't think UCF is going to be very good, but it's a road game, I guess. 4-7. Kansas State might be solid. 4-8, I guess. I feel like 4-8's your floor, but if you go with the ceiling, Southeast Missouri, you win. Iowa, you go on the road. They're still breaking in Hank Brown. He's not the quarterback they thought he was. He's cagey and he's playing against new defense. Jalen Raynor is a mobile quarterback that Iowa does not see very often. You go in there and you sneak one out on the road against Iowa. Bowling Green comes down, you take care of it. You're 3-0 headed into Big 12 play. Utah is solid, but you're protecting home. You're protecting the home field. Again, new stadium. They're still trying to gel under the new coaching staff. And there it turns out those pieces that left from Michigan were a little bit more important than they thought. You're 4-0. West Virginia comes to town. You're 5-0. Protecting home. You're protecting Jack Trice Stadium. I don't think you're going to go and be on the road and beat BYU. If you do, great. I'm happy to be wrong about that. But right now, I think you're 5-1. Arizona, better on defense, still not a lot going on offense. You can go down and steal that one. So you're 6-1. Oklahoma State's bad. Could be bad. 7-1. Baylor is a tough game. But you know, they can win this one. Like they can absolutely win this one. But I do think there's going to be some level of desperation in this, and I don't like playing at Waco. I'll say you lose this just so I don't end up at 11-1. You could absolutely win at Baylor though. Cincinnati, or you're protecting Jack Trice Stadium, beating Cincinnati. UCF's kind of underwhelming. Doesn't matter. You go there and win that, and you beat Kansas State at home and win your 7th Farmageddon in 9 years. There is a doable path here to 10-2. I mean, even if you say you swap out the Iowa game and say they're not ready for it, and then you beat Baylor instead, there's a path to 10-2 that's not ridiculous at all. The only to 10-2, you only have to win 2 of at UCF, at Baylor, and at Iowa. You do got to win at Arizona. Maybe you say you lose at Arizona, call it 9-3. If you go 2-2 out of UCF, Baylor, Arizona, Iowa, if you can go 2-2 out of those, 9-3 is right there. All you do is protect home field and go 2-3 on the road. That's it. That's all you got to do. Even if you say, okay, Utah's good, they pick you off at home. 8-4. It's right there. There's a very doable schedule in front of Iowa State for this fall. There's lots of winnable games. The road games aren't horrible. You know, the only bad road game that you really don't want to have to do is at BYU. You just chalk it up as an L and you're fine with it and you move along. But other than that, the road schedule is pretty manageable. You know, I think Iowa will be solid on defense. I'm not convinced at all about them on offense. So, you know, shit could go wrong. You know, they just, Jalen Raynor throws too many picks and the defense doesn't gel right. You know, the defense is clearly like not quite yet ready to play the 4-2-5 or the 4-3 or whatever Jimmy Rogers wants to call it. And maybe, the offensive line isn't quite gelled yet. You go 4-8. That could happen. 4-8 doesn't necessarily mean any sort of it doesn't necessarily mean a failure. It just depends on how they're playing towards the end. It just means, you would like to not go 4-8, 5-7 or something like that would be better. But, you can be 4-8 and still be like, okay, this thing's pointed in the right direction. So, but you could also, there's a path to 10-2 that isn't ridiculous. Even if you lose at Iowa, at BYU, you can win the rest of those games. So if I were a bet man, I think I would be, I'm going to put my over under at 7.5, I think, and see kind of where we're at with that. I'm going to put it at 7.5. And I think I'd be inclined to take the over. Now, Vegas will probably set it at 5.5, maybe 6.5. I would say 5.5 is what Vegas will set it as, I'm guessing. I would be inclined to set it closer to 6.5 or 7.5 because I really do think by the time we get to this later in the season, a couple of these games get easier because I think Dave Aranda is coaching for his job. I think Scott Satterfield's coaching for his job. I think UCF's a mess. And I don't know about Kansas State. Maybe Avery's broken by then. So yeah, interesting interesting look at it, and maybe we get to the spring showcase that Jimmy Rogers is going to hold, and maybe we don't feel good about it anymore. You know, and we just like, well, I this is going to be bad, and then we recalibrate. But first look, based on what I've seen, yeah, I think Vegas will say 5.5. I think Vegas will say 5.5, and I would personally I would hammer that over. I think, you know, let's say just to get to 6 wins, you got Southeast Missouri, Bowling Green. You've got West Virginia at home. You've got Oklahoma State at home, Cincinnati at home. That's 5 right there. All you need to do is then either beat Utah or Kansas State at home, or you win one of the road games. Like, that's it. And you're right there. And your road games aren't, you can win at UCF or at Baylor, or you beat Utah at home, or you beat Kansas State at home, and you got to 6 right there. I do want to like still make it very clear that you should go into you do what you want, I guess, but I am going to be going into this 2026 season with no expectations.